All right, good afternoon. I would like to introduce Kathy Tolke, volunteer within Craig County 4-H. Before diving into this interview, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your role within the 4-H program?
Sure. I grew up on a dairy farm in Illinois, so that's sort of my background of agriculture. And I actually was a biology major in college, but then did a master's work, but never finished at in agriculture, mostly related to field crops, forages, things like that. I worked
Oh,
at the Dairy Forage Research Center for a number of years, and so now I raise sheep, and then my daughter was in 4-H and my son for a little bit, but my daughter did 4-H and showed sheep and pigs and many different animals throughout her high school, middle school age days. And so during that time is when I started to become a volunteer for the Livestock Club. So I think it's been about 15 years that I've been a leader for our Livestock Club.
sounds like you are very involved. And we understand that volunteers such as yourself play a critical role in the success of an organization. And as you present your perspective and diligence, the organization isn't only reaping benefits, but so are you. So, one of the questions I have for you is what would you consider your why behind joining this volunteer organization?
Probably, first of all, there wasn't anyone else that probably had as much time as I did since I wasn't working full time. I didn't have a full time job. I was mostly doing work here. And also, I had an agricultural background, so I had a lot of the knowledge I had, a lot I didn't, but don't mind learning it along with the kids. I enjoy agriculture, I enjoy animals, and I really have enjoyed getting to know the kids. I mean, I know so many more kids in the community in a more intense way than I would if I wasn't doing this job. So I really appreciate that fact of it, that you get to know kids in a different way.
Awesome. It sounds like you have gained a lot from 4 H, but if you were to go back and say a goal of yours was when you first started, what would be that goal that you were trying to develop in hopes of return from the 4 H program?
Hmm. I'm not a very good at goal setting kind of person, but I think just having kids get to know livestock and get to understand agriculture and place an importance and emphasis on it. And I've been really impressed with the number of kids we've had from our county that have continued on in careers related to agriculture. I mean, of the kids that would come through our club since I've been here, we have several extension agents. We have my daughter teaches at Tech. She's in the animal science program there. We have people raising horses and sheep as a business. We have several younger people that are in college still doing livestock programs. So seeing that really makes me feel like they're the future. They're the future of what's happening here, just like yourself. They're promoting
Yeah.
agriculture, and that's what they want to do as a life business or a life job. And so that's exciting to me. Some other goals, I guess, was just having kids have something to do that's valuable. I think you learn a lot working with animals. And I know when you have to teach a kid how to show an animal, you get to know your animals pretty well. You develop quite a bond. So there is kind of a hard thing when you have to let go of those animals, but it's also the idea that when we use animals or livestock for food, that it's important to know where that food comes from and how it's treated, and you can see the value in treating your animals well, I think, through 4-H.
I would definitely agree. My experience with FFA and being able to see the kids succeed and learn something new and be excited about it really makes my inner self excited too, as I grew up in agriculture.
Yeah, and just to watch them, the first couple of years they show an animal, and it's, you can tell it's their
Oh,
first
yeah.
year or two. And then all of a sudden when it starts to click and they get it, and to watch that transformation and to see them go from being the last place in the class to being maybe the first, or at least in the upper tier, especially in showmanship, because that is so much more about what you're about as a showman and what you're
Yeah.
learning as a showman.
Well, that is awesome. So it seems like you have had a great impact on 4 H.
I hope.
It sounds like it. But now, as we know, in order to reach achievement within the organization, there has to be some type of collaboration and engagement along with management within the program. So, when considering your perfect volunteer team, what does it look like in terms of leadership and relationships?
I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but I think you're talking about people that to volunteer and help work with
Yeah. So,
me.
what would be your perfect volunteer team and how would you manage it?
Right. So I think the first one is just commitment. We struggle to have, especially parents now that are committed to connecting with the club. They like the fact that their kids are in it, but it may be hard for them to find the time to commit their time. And so when I can find parents who will give me, if I need help for an event, they'll be there every time. That is that's gold, that's a
Yeah.
golden thing. And so that seems to get harder and harder to find that. People a lot of times like to get involved in things, but then they don't make the next level of commitment of actually doing the things you need them to do. So if I can get a group together, I really try to, I think the important part about volunteers and keeping volunteers is just to really recognize their importance and their value, and make them have jobs that make them feel useful, not just give them busy work. And also, I think just praise when their job is done well, because I think too often we don't do that piece of it. So just to make sure people feel that there's gratitude and that they're appreciated, I guess.
You answered that question really well. Part of our module reflections this course was talking about the value of a volunteer and making them feel like they're not a second-class citizen within the organization. To tag on to what you said, though, if you had to use 3 descriptive words to describe the program management that you currently have within Craig County 4-H, what words would you use?
Oh boy, that's a hard question. 3 descriptive words to describe the management?
Mm-hmm. The management style.
I think commitment is just a key word.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I have to, for myself personally as the leader, just constantly keep on top of myself, because it's easy for me to let things slide. But to just keep information coming to people, to keep programs running, to keep people involved, to keep accountability. So I think commitment for us probably the first part. And maybe the second would be communication. Because if people aren't informed, it feels like then they slowly slip away. If you can keep people informed and they know what's going on and there aren't a lot of surprises, and that's hard because a lot of times people tend to avoid or ignore emails that are sent out, or that like, I'll read that later. And so you're like, well, we sent that out in an email. Well, I never saw it. And so you find that just being able to have good sources of communication. Sometimes with text, I send a group text of people and I'm like, did everyone see this? Did anyone, who else is, so just to try to continually get that communication, keep that open and keep it going. So commitment, communication, and I think just maybe appreciation, or having a level of grace also to be able to give people their space and not have high expectations, but just to appreciate what you do get from people might be important. So maybe those 3. I don't know.
That actually adds perfectly, because my next set of questions is based on the involvement of communication within an organization. As we know, there's many counterparts to an evolving organization with many working hands and working thoughts. But part of that is communication and reflection. So with this being said, are there any strategies that you utilize to continually reflect on your experiences as the volunteer leader of the Livestock Club?
Say the question one more time.
Are there any strategies that you utilize to continually reflect on your experiences as the leader of the club? Do you ever sit back and think about, what went well, what went bad?
Yeah. I think just to stay connected with the quote graduates of the 4-H program and to see where they're headed, that really helps me to continually feel there is a value in the program, even though sometimes it feels like you're pulling teeth to get kids to come to a meeting. I think we have about 11 kids signed up, and our meeting tonight, I think about 4 or 5 can come, And so to just say, to try to let that go and to look at the value that they're getting. Maybe kids won't stick with it. Maybe they will. Sometimes there's one that surprises you that you think they're going to be drop out after a year, and yet they stay in and they keep moving along, and their interest stays, and they may convert over to the FFA program. We have some that have done that too. So I guess to try to look ahead instead of looking maybe just at what's happening at the present, because sometimes the present can get a little discouraging. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I would definitely agree that
right.
I need to reflect and look at the positives that have been done, not just like currently. Because I know there's some days in the classroom and we're trying to do something and it just isn't going. I feel like they're not involved, but I look at the whole scheme of things.
Right.
And I have some really successful kids who are really came out of their shell and enjoyed agriculture. So there are positives to everything.
Yeah, and sometimes those kids are ones that surprise you that have no connection or background,
absolutely.
and yet they really seem to connect with the piece of it. So,
and this is a little more simplified question, but since you work with a lot of youth, what do you find is the best method of communication with them? Because we know how teens can be with email or phone calls and stuff like that.
So, well, in some ways, my kids will stay connected. The older ones, there's some of them that connect with me pretty easily. And so I think trying to find out what other things they're involved in and ask about those. I have a couple of kids that, I know sort of the sports they're playing, or I know what other things they're doing. So to kind of keep a mental note of that. I have one kid that I, would used to go to some of their sporting events just because they were in my 4-H club. They're my kids, So just those are ways I think that you show you're actually interested in them beyond 4-H. You're interested in them as a person. See the question? What did you ask me?
No, you're good. How do you communicate?
So I think that just knowing who they are, not just knowing them in 4-H, but knowing who they are and their backgrounds and other things, because that can tell you a lot about a kid too. Certain kids, just depending on how they're raised or what their background is, you can understand their personalities a lot more. So I think that helps me a lot.
Yeah. Lastly, you have provided great insight on sort of your goals of 4-H, the methods that work for you, and sort of the 3 descriptive words that sort of summarize your success and achievement within the organization. But moving forward, do you have any advice for young adults or adults that are beginning to realize their spot in volunteering? And maybe what advice would you give them as they started out trying to find their organization to volunteer with?
I think certainly figure out what you enjoy and then find a way to plug in. Like in our county, and you're probably getting more and more familiar with it, if we didn't have volunteers, we wouldn't have much going on in this county.
Absolutely.
All the sports programs are run by volunteers. The 4-H programs all run by volunteers. We have a library. I'm on the library board. That's all done by volunteer work. I mean, the county inputs a little, but not very much. And, there's just a huge number of volunteer things that happen in this community, which is wonderful. I mean, wonderful. So find a passion, find a thing you're really interested in, and then find a way to plug into that, I think. And I think because for me, since I've always enjoyed animals and agriculture, and I grew up on a dairy farm, I said, and I always liked farming. And so just be able to do sort of like a small scale piece of it here at my place, and then to try to encourage other people. And it is impressive the number of people that are kind of doing agriculture in a small scale right now. And so I think find a passion, whether it's agriculture, whether it's books in a library, whether it's politics. There's a lot of different ways you can plug into a community, but communities really need volunteers. I mean, there's no doubt about that. So I think that's the key piece. And then go into it with an attitude of you're there to support and help, not take over or do everything, because those things don't usually work. So, so I guess that would be my answer.
Perfect. So, thank you so much for your time
today. You're
so
welcome. Hopefully that was helpful to you.
Oh, it definitely was.